that side of the table. You can relax. It's going to be a fun conversation. So.
I'm Herman Johnson Jr. I'm a professor at the Cumberland School of Law in Birmingham, Alabama.
I'm Augustus Chin. I'm a municipal judge from Salt Lake City, Utah.
All right, hello, we are Reno Heights Unit 3. My name is Maddie Smith, and I'll be attending Portland State University next year.
Hello, my name is Carson Wagner, and I will be attending the University of Nevada.
Hello, my name is Annika Jensen, and I will be attending Willamette University.
Hello, my name is Jacqueline Nader, and I will also be attending the University of Nevada.
Hi, my name is Bailey Parkin, and I will be attending the University of Nevada. Our unit coach is Mr. Matthew Oakes, and our teacher is Mr. Richard Clark.
Okay, all set? Okay, question this afternoon is number 3. How and why has war proved to be a catalyst for each of the amendments to the Constitution that expanded the right to vote? How and why have Americans used the rights to assemble and petition to secure the right to vote? What arguments were used to justify property requirements for voting, and what arguments were used to oppose property requirements for voting?
When the Continental Congress approved the words, "We, therefore, the representatives of the United States of America, in General Congress assembled, solemnly declare that these united colonies are, and of right, ought to be free and independent states," they fortified that the war for independence was about direct representation and expanded enfranchisement. The tyranny of the British government compelled the people to assemble in the form of militia, fighting to elect a representative democracy. Following the War of 1812, veterans furthered the fight for enfranchisement by challenging the landed aristocracy and removing the property requirements that once restricted male suffrage.
Though passion can create steadfast resolve to achieve victory, such victories often have a cost. An estimated 200,000 black troops enlisted for freedom they were never able to hold. With slavery abolished, African Americans were given citizenship, yet states still denied their right to vote. The 15th Amendment was needed to expand suffrage and lend protection from blockades regarding race, color, and previous condition of servitude, even though such provisions were supposedly granted by Section 2 of the 14th.
From Plessy to the Bridge in Selma, thousands of African Americans fought a war against Jim Crow by exercising their right to assemble and petition, demanding unabridged access to the voting booth. The ratification of the 24th Amendment in 1964 saw the end of restricting voting rights by reason of failure to pay any poll tax or other tax. Grandfather clauses and literacy tests continued to block African Americans from exercising their full voting rights until the Enforcement Clause of Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 completed the prohibition of all 3 forms of voter oppression.
As Susan B. Anthony wrote in the Revolution Journal of 1868, "I beg you to speak of woman as you do the Negro. Speak of her as a human being, as a citizen of the United States, as half of a people in whose hands lies the destiny of this nation." In 1874, the decision of Minor v. Happersett ruled that the right to vote did not extend to women under the 14th Amendment. World War I challenged the decision by putting women into the workforce. President Woodrow Wilson's 14 points empowered women to join feminist movements, such as the Silent Sentinels, advocating for equality. Warren G. Harding promised a return to normalcy. However, the war placed women into the labor force, allowing them to acquire property and increase their value in society, reinforcing the momentum for the 19th.
In his 2003 article, Conscription, Congressman Ron Paul described the military draft as forced servitude, with the risk of death and serious injury as a price to live free. The controversy surrounding 18-year-olds gaining the right to vote began in 1943, when President Franklin D. Roosevelt lowered the age of the draft from 21 to 18. During the Vietnam War, about 61% of those killed were younger than 21. The slogan of "old enough to fight, old enough to vote" became the battle cry of the youth voting rights movement. A provision in the 1970 Voting Rights Act allowed 18-year-olds to vote in federal, state, and local elections, but later that year, Oregon v. Mitchell ruled this unconstitutional. The protests sparked by the court's decision led to the ratification of the 26th Amendment a year later. Facing similar barriers, legal residents are ineligible to apply for citizenship and receive suffrage rights unless they register for the draft under the U.S. Military Selective Service Act.
The founders could not foresee the importance that one's socioeconomic standing would have in democracy. Gerrymandering is the new property barrier limiting American suffrage, keeping certain neighborhoods divided and held captive by their demographics. As fiscal corruption plagues modern democracy, 3 million citizens have signed a petition to overturn Citizens United v. FEC, which qualified money as political speech. Though progress has been made through decisions like Evanwell v. Abbott, Suffrage has yet to be separated from its ties to wealth and property. The unadulterated right to vote remains one held by only those who have found the courage to demand it in return for their service to their country. Thank you.
Let's pick up right there. So what other current issues are impacting the right to vote or harming the right to vote, and how might you propose solving those issues?
Well, as we see in Wisconsin, they recently required voter ID laws. So that is disenfranchising a lot of their minorities who are unable to purchase a voter ID, government-issued ID to vote. So that is definitely a restriction on voting. A way to prevent this from happening is keeping the DMVs open longer for these minorities to go to after work, or even reimbursing them for their travels to the DMV.
According to an Atlantic article by Andrew Cohen, we see that 1/3 of the counties in Texas possess are outside of the region for a DMV and do not actually have a location to receive a government ID within their county. And we see that in these counties that do not have access to a location that would provide them with a government-issued ID, 61% of the population in those counties is Hispanic. So we see that people are not able to take off time off of work to go out and travel and get their government-issued IDs in order to go and register at the polling place. So they have to choose between their right to earn a paycheck and their right to vote.
Any other issues?
The form in which some states hold voting is also an issue. In cases like Oregon, we see how they mail absentee ballots, and that seems to be much more convenient for people who can't make it to a voting booth. While in Nevada, we have same-day registration as voting, and that makes it a lot more accessible depending on which state we're in.
Additionally, in the younger generations, a lot of 18-year-olds and college students go out of state for their schools, and if their state does not allow absentee voting, they are unable to vote, so that is why their percentage is so low in showing up to the polls to vote.
You mentioned earlier an issue that I'd like to press on. Do you think that non-citizens should be allowed to vote in our country?
As far as it goes with legal citizens, they should have the right to vote due to the fact that they are serving in our military and they are paying taxes. Therefore, they should have a voice on what kind of war we are getting ourselves into or what kind of taxes we should be paying to our national government.
But on the other side of the argument, we can look to legal scholar Stephen F. Taylor, who believes in the stakeholder claim. And if you own property in your nation and that you are participating in your actual government and as an active citizen, you would have to have the right to vote connected to that and connected to your actual stake in the country. Legal residents often don't have such a stake in their nation, so they might not be as inclined to vote in as educated as a manner as other citizens.
Agreeing with my colleague Jacqueline, I agree that legal residents should have the right to vote because we see in certain counties in San Diego and even Maryland, they allow legal residents to vote. So these are considered laboratories of democracy which can spread throughout the United States.
So your example is local election.
Yes,
Then-
local elections.
So not in federal elections, national elections.
Well, if they are allowed to vote in local elections, they should also be allowed to vote in federal elections. But we see these laboratories of democracies are only, they're beginning with the local elections to see if it can expand to federal elections.
I disagree with my colleague here. I would say that the right to vote is one held by a citizen, and until we change that language within the 14th and the 15th Amendments, the right to vote needs to be protected for those citizens, and that's how we uphold the integrity of our voting system as it is.
We've talked about the right to vote, but I'd like to hear about whether we should have a constitutional amendment requiring citizens to vote as they do in other countries. And whether you think that's a good idea or not.
I would not encourage a right to vote or a requirement for voting. When you vote, that is your voice exercising your right to representation. However, if you choose not to vote, that's your own choice. And by choosing not to vote in that sense, that is a way of political speech in itself. So by requiring a right to vote amendment, you would be detracting from someone's ability to not.
I'd like to disagree with Maddie and say that we should have an amendment. As we see in Australia, there's compulsory voting, and they get 80 out of 100 people, so 80% of their population to vote, and that would absolutely benefit the United States because we definitely are not in that high of a percentile. So I agree we should have an amendment to get more of the voices, especially minorities, heard in our elections.
We should have an amendment just because in America we have a democratic government, and if we are disenfranchising some of the population that is in this government, how are we able to call our nation free?
So I want to pick up on the point that 80% turnout is somehow better than the 60% we see in this country. I mean, to me, that's just 20% more people who don't know what they're voting about. Shouldn't there be more requirements for voting? Shouldn't there be education requirements, testing requirements, something to ensure an informed electorate?
Not necessarily. We want an impassioned citizenry who want the right to vote and they want to exercise their right to vote. By requiring people, again, to go out and vote, this isn't fostering a passionate, educated citizenry at all.
On the other side of the argument, we see states like Arizona who have already adopted state laws that every single student who graduates high school also has to accurately pass the citizenship exam. So we see that these laboratories of democracy, as my colleague Bailey pointed out earlier, can really spawn the argument for a greater movement in that regard in order to increase the educated amount of the populace that's actually turning out to vote.
Nice job. Breathe. Let's see. I thought the prepared remarks, I thought you did a nice job covering the ground that needed to be covered on the question. Some good examples. The minor v. Haversack case was a good example in there. The poll tax, the 24th Amendment, we haven't heard that as often today. And I thought the most effective part in the presentation was, given what the question is about, was where you talked about the Voting Rights Act of 1970 gave the right to vote, but then Oregon v. Mitchell, and then protests, and so actually you started backing up. Vietnam War, 1970, and you really traced how that, the 26th Amendment came to be, and I thought it was a very effective way to present that issue. On the question about current issues, I like how you had one in your presentation, number one, and then number two, I thought, you identified voter ID right away, and had some good examples there. I had to follow up to get a second one. I thought you guys could have volunteered that, but once I did follow up, you had another one. And I think it's a big one, right? The fact that we don't have universal standards is a real big issue because, as you said, different counties, even within a particular state, have different systems that, it can be very difficult to navigate if you're moving from place to place. So, nice job overall.
I really appreciated your presentation, especially the way you started it out with the Declaration of Independence, given that is the broad theme for the entire Unit 3. And tied back the right to petition and the right to assemble back to the Declaration of Independence, and that was brilliant to bring that in. When you address the property requirement and how, of course, that used to be an express part of many different voting regimes, and his very interesting take on that about how Citizens United and other aspects of voting today actually constitutes a different sort of property requirement. Very intriguing, and would like to see some legal challenges of one day for one of you. For the follow-up, I like to rely upon data. I like to be empirical. So bringing out 1/3 of Texas counties, bringing out the 6%, I think a very, very good approach to support your positions with the data. And so all in all, a very good job. So thank you.
I too appreciated your approach to the question at issue. I like the timeline perspective you provided. And as far as the responsiveness to the follow-up question, I thought it was well done. You brought up the issue of denied citizenship in your initial presentation regarding those who serve in the military, and then you were able to follow up on that. The only issue you mentioned, the women's suffrage, again, this is an issue that's quite relevant in terms of how voting has improved by virtue of women's participation and the high volume of women participating